Welcome back to my channel. My name's Jennifer and today I'm going to talk about my spring recommendations. Um, I am currently experiencing non-spring conditions. We are in the throes of frozen rain. I have a yard full of snow, but hope springs eternal, and so I'm going to give you my 5 recommendations for books that I think are going to welcome spring for me. I actually didn't grapple too hard with this one. I have a lot of books that are actually set in spring, but they're not very happy springtime books. And so I think there's a bit of a difference between books that are set in spring and books that just feel like spring. So the 5 books I have just kind of represent what spring means to me. And so book number 1 up for discussion is The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. I read this book actually last summer, but the reason I picked this one is because honestly, after so much snow in winter, I find as the snow melts, everything is so dirty, like just incredibly dirty. My yard is just mucky and I feel so just unclean from everything. Even just my time spent in Winnipeg, there's dust and dirt everywhere. And I find this book is just a good way to get rid of clutter. Come springtime, I like to declutter my house. I love to just start purging and getting rid of everything that got accumulated through the winter, getting rid of all the winter clothes, packing everything up, putting things away that aren't needed for the summer. I really enjoy this book as a springtime read, just to re-kick off my springtime cleaning. The next book that I have for a springtime read is Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear by Elizabeth Gilbert. For one, I picked this is just because this cover is just, oh, it's so nice feeling. It's got that buttery feeling and these colors are just, I love looking at the colors. And I'm going to be honest, I don't like Elizabeth Gilbert. I could not stand Eat, Pray, Love. I thought that book was just, it was something else. And one day, maybe I will discuss my feelings on Elizabeth Gilbert's writing of Eat, Pray, Love. But today we are talking about Big Magic. I read this book 2 years ago. Last year, sorry. This book was recommended to me through my book club. I had expressed a huge dislike for Elizabeth Gilbert as somebody was going to pick one of her books for our book club. And everyone had recommended actually Big Magic. So I picked this book up, and this book I kind of feel makes me feel like spring outside of the cover, is just that feeling of being ready for summer, trying new things, getting out there and reinventing yourself. It kind of goes hand in hand with decluttering my house. I always feel like spring is just when you're starting to blossom for the year. And I find this book is just always a nice read in the spring, just to get me prepared for going back to work, just to prepare me for the year coming up ahead. I always find, I know January is the beginning of the year, but I find spring for me personally feels like the beginning of the year. So I always feel like a book that talks about how to, I guess, a little personal development and how to encourage growth and creativity always brings me happiness in spring. And so my next book, of course, now I don't know if this is as obvious to everybody else as it is to me, but my next pick for spring recommendation is this gem, Pride and Prejudice. I did not read this book until I was actually in my 20s. Shocking, I know. I don't know how that escaped me, but this book has always just reminded me of spring. Now, I know some parts of it aren't set during spring, but the story itself is just, I don't know, it just always makes me feel, I actually watched this movie, actually both the TV series and the movie, quite a few times throughout the year, and this book just always puts a smile on my face. It's just so light and happy and beautifully written that I always feel a lightness when thinking about this book. And once again, it's a bit of a tie into spring. And this particular edition I just bought is illustrated. I believe there's a Sense and Sensibility copy as well that is illustrated by the same publisher. And I just absolutely adore this book. I believe I have 6 or 7 copies of Pride and Prejudice, and there's nothing I love more, like, even handwriting. It's gorgeous. But this story always just makes me think of spring and the gloriousness of spring. And I think I always feel like, what would Pemberley be in the springtime? And so yeah, that one I usually pull out in the springtime for a reread. Another book that always makes me think of spring, and this isn't a book, it's a series, and shocker, it is the Little House on the Prairie series. This is my only copy of any of the books from the series. This is Little Town on the Prairie. Now this book starts in spring and ends in winter, so this book always makes me feel a bit more wintry because it talks about settling in for the winter, but it does start in the spring. Little House on the Prairie reminds me more of spring, but this whole series just reminds me of springtime, and I don't know if it's the farming aspect of it, but this book just always, the whole series makes me think of spring, the green fields that are popping up and planting, and little towns that are like the doors are opening up now, and everybody's getting outside, and the fresh air, and this is just one that I don't even know when I read this, so I don't know why it makes me think of spring, but it always, and probably forevermore, this series will always make me think of spring. And another book that, and this isn't a book, this is an author, actually, a particular author that always makes me think of spring. That is Any Cookbook by Michael Smith. He is a chef, I believe, out of Nova Scotia. It's Nova Scotia or PEI, but I'm pretty sure he lives out of Nova Scotia. And any of his cookbooks just make me think of spring. Possibly because of the pictures. Everything is just so colorful and so refreshing. All of his meals are quick. All of his meals are delicious. He's a fantastic chef. I believe he's had a TV series for a few years. And just, like, all of his pictures just make me think of being outdoors and having bonfires and sitting around with friends and just enjoying, like, oh, bean salad. That makes me think of spring and having picnics outside. I know I should be saying this makes me think of summer, but it doesn't. It makes me think of spring just because of the colors coming out and getting ready for summer and all of these fantastic things. This is his only cookbook that I personally own. I have a few copies of cookbooks at work that my bosses have bought for me, that we keep there in the kitchen. I cannot recommend him enough. I think any of his cookbooks are worthy of having a spring fest if you want to have. So yeah, any book by Michael Smith is a fantastic book. I highly recommend his books. I've tested recipes from him, and generally they are always fantastic, and just the colors, the beautiful colors, the fresh ingredients that he always recommends using, just always remind me of spring and getting ready for picnic season and barbecue season, and just sitting outside as the weather's changing and reading a cookbook is fabulous. And the last book, I got this as a last minute addition for spring reading. This is my favorite book in the whole wide world. I'm not going to lie, I have a favorite. Shocking, I know no reader should ever have a favorite. It's like picking a favorite child, but this is the book that I think has actually followed me everywhere in life since I've managed to get my hands on a copy. And that is Christy by Catherine Marshall. really wish I had a hardcover of this book, but all I could ever find was a paperback. This book is about a girl named Christy who goes into the Smoky Mountains to teach through her, I believe it's her church, and comes across the locals living in the Smokies and how their lives are lived through stories, through feuds, through bootlegging, how their faith is intertwined in their lives. I believe this spans several seasons, but this book this is just such a book that touches me right in the feels. And because of that, I always just think of this one in spring. This is another book that just always makes, just for regrowth. It's a book that I think should be read at least once a year, if not, maybe once every couple of years if you really want to get slack. I cannot say enough about this book. This is actually an old book. My God, this was written in 1967. So, it's an oldie. But it is one of the best books I have ever read to talk about somebody coming from privilege and living amongst people who'd considered to be unprivileged. And how she comes to understand that sometimes it's not your privilege that gives you a good life. Sometimes it's your outlook on life and your faith and your family. So this book just always reminds me of spring, and I kind of love that. So I recommend everybody run out and get a copy and read it. And if you come across where to find hard copies, let me know. I really want one, because this is just one of my favorite books in the whole wide world. That will always remind me of spring. I don't know, never reminds me of winter or summer. Never fall. I never think of fall when I think of that book. But those are my spring recommendations. These are all the books that remind me of spring, make me think of spring, or that I read during spring. If you have a different opinion, feel free to let me know in the comments below. If you have any recommendations for any further books to read during the spring, I'm always on the lookout for books to read in the spring because they're not as easy to come by. Like I said, I own a ton of books that are set in spring, but they don't feel like spring, whether they're depressing or they have dark matter, whether they're, I don't know, they don't have that spring quality to them. So without me rambling on anymore, happy reading, and I'll see you next time. Bye.